All right, let's dive into a really dark chapter of Alaskan history. We're going back to the 1970s, a time when an oil boom was bringing tons of money and people to the state, but it also brought a kind of darkness that would haunt Alaska for decades. This is the story of how they caught the Butcher Baker.
You have to picture it. Anchorage back then was basically a modern-day frontier town. The Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline was a massive deal, and thousands of people were flooding in, all looking for work and a new start. But here's the thing about a population like that. A lot of people were transient, with no real family or friends in the area. And that, tragically, created the perfect hunting ground for a predator. When someone went missing, it was just way too easy for them to vanish without a trace.
So as these young women started disappearing, this terrifying question starts to form. How on earth did a seemingly mild-mannered baker, a guy with a family, a respected business owner, become one of the most prolific serial killers in American history? We're going to break down the investigation that finally pulled back the curtain on the monster who was hiding in plain sight.
Okay, so this all starts not with a bang, but with a series of really grim discoveries out in that vast Alaskan wilderness. And little by little, these discoveries would start to reveal a terrifying pattern.
In the early 80s, bodies of young women start turning up, a lot of them around the Knik River area. Now, many of the victims were dancers or sex workers, people kind of living on the fringes of this new booming society. So at first, police didn't really connect the dots. To them, it just looked like a heartbreaking series of individual tragedies, another sad side effect of the city's crazy growth.
But then they got the break, and it was a huge one. It was a key ballistic link. See, the shell casings found near Paula Golding's body were a perfect match to the ones found near Sherry Morrow. And that changes everything. This wasn't just a bunch of isolated incidents anymore. This was the work of a single, methodical killer. And just like that, the hunt was officially on.
With the body count rising, the Alaska State Troopers knew they were dealing with something they hadn't seen before. They realized they needed a totally new approach, a way to get inside this killer's head. They had to figure out what made him tick.
So, Trooper Glenn Flothy reached out to this young FBI agent named John E. Douglas. Now, Douglas was a pioneer in this brand new, almost experimental field of psychological profiling. The troopers sent him everything they had. Every file, every crime scene photo, every single detail from the bodies they'd found, just hoping he could build some kind of picture of this ghost they were chasing.
And the profile Douglas sent back? It was absolutely chilling in how specific it was. He said they were looking for an experienced hunter, but a guy with deep-seated low self-esteem and a history of being rejected by women. He'd probably keep souvenirs from his victims, things like jewelry. Douglas even predicted he might have a stutter. I mean, this was no generic sketch. It was a psychological blueprint, and it pointed investigators toward one man, a local baker and avid pilot named Robert Hansen.
So they had a prime suspect, which was huge. But a profile isn't hard evidence, right? They couldn't move on just that. What they needed was something concrete, and they were about to get it thanks to the unbelievable bravery of the one victim who got away.
Her name was Cindy Paulson, and she was only 17. She described an absolute nightmare. Hansen abducted her, took her to his home, and tortured her. But her ordeal was far from over. He then forced her into his car and started driving her to Merrill Field, a small local airport.
And she knew exactly what that meant. He was going to fly her out into the middle of nowhere, just like he'd done to the others. This was it. This was her one and only chance to survive. So as Hansen was distracted, loading up his plane, she slipped out of the car and just ran for her life, still in handcuffs, sprinting for the road.
And in that desperate moment, she did something incredibly smart. She kicked off her blue sneakers and left them behind in his car. Now think about that. This wasn't just a forgotten item. It was a conscious act. It was physical proof, a piece of herself that proved she had been in his vehicle. That piece of evidence would turn out to be absolutely critical.
So now you've got Cindy Paulson's powerful, credible testimony, and you've got this uncannily accurate FBI profile. It was the 1-2 punch the police needed. They finally had enough to make their move.
With a search warrant in hand, investigators could finally step inside Robert Hansen's world. They could start peeling back that facade of the respectable family man, the friendly baker, to see the monster that was lurking underneath.
And what they found, hidden away in his attic, was a treasure trove of horror. They found the very souvenirs the FBI profile had predicted, jewelry that belonged to missing women. They found the .223 caliber rifle that they would later confirm was a ballistic match to the murders. And maybe most damning of all, they found an aeronautical chart.
This map, it was a chilling ledger of his reign of terror. It was marked with over 36 little X's, and many of those X's corresponded perfectly to the locations where bodies had already been discovered. For the investigators, it was like a gruesome treasure map, leading them directly to his victims' graves scattered all across the Alaskan bush.
So when he was confronted with this mountain of irrefutable physical evidence, the map, the gun, the jewelry from his victims, the mild-mannered baker's facade didn't just crumble, it completely disintegrated. The game was up.
With nowhere left to run, Hansen started talking, and he confessed. He confessed to murdering 17 women over a terrifying 12-year period. 17 lives stolen by this one man.
As part of a plea deal, basically to avoid having to go through 17 separate murder trials, Hansen agreed to cooperate, and what happened next is just surreal. He took investigators up in a helicopter and led them on a tour of his killing fields, coldly pointing out the graves of his victims from the air.
The final sentence was just staggering: 461 years in prison, plus a life sentence, and of course, absolutely no possibility of parole. The butcher baker of Alaska was never going to see the outside of a prison cell again.
You know, the prosecutor, Frank Rothschild, really summed it up perfectly. He said there was this grim, poetic justice to it all. Here's a guy whose whole passion was hunting in the vast, beautiful Alaskan wilderness, and his punishment was to be caged for the rest of his life in a tiny cell with no view at all. Robert Hansen died in prison back in 2014, and he probably took a lot of secrets with him. But the story doesn't end there. Not for the victims and their families. For them, the search for closure and for identity, it continues even today.
And get this, in 2021, there was a major breakthrough. Using the incredible power of genetic genealogy, a victim who for decades had only been known as Horseshoe Harriet was finally identified. Her name was Robin Pelkey. It's just a testament to the relentless dedication of these investigators and the power of modern science to give every single victim their name back, no matter how much time has passed.
And that's really the thing to take away from this. Even after the killer is caught and locked away forever, the work is never truly done. The hunt for answers and for justice for every last victim and their families, it never, ever ends.